So I'm here with Professor Ralph Fertig, and I'm Brandon Wilson, and holding the camera is Justin Nguyen. We're going to start off asking Professor Fertig a number of questions about his activism and his progressive actions towards the world. So, what were some of the things that motivated you to, do anything?
It was in my genes. I had no choice. My parents migrated to America from Germany, and my grandparents were all, and most of the family were taken off to concentration camps and murdered. When I was very young, I grew up in an apartment on the north side of Chicago, and various refugees came to stay with us for days, weeks, months. I shared my couch, my couch became a bed at night with various refugees, and would lie on the floor reading comics to them to help them learn the English language and hear about the atrocities. So I was very deeply committed to freedom and democracy. When I was a teenager, my family moved to the south side of Chicago, and it was in September 1945. The war was over, we were all joyous. There was going to be freedom, there was going to be equality, non-discrimination. And I tried to register at the high school in the area in which we moved. There was a picket line around the high school. The only picket line I've ever crossed in my life. But this was one that I will cross again in a minute. In the New York second, as they say. They had picket signs saying that they wanted to redraw the district lines because a black family had moved into the district over the summer period, had broken out of the very tight Chicago ghetto, the Black Belt that extended south from the Chicago Loop. So I pushed my way through that picket line, and I demanded that I be registered along with the young man who was sitting cowering, actually, on a bench outside the principal's office. I was registered, he wasn't. They redrew the lines, maintained the segregation, and beat the hell out of me as I came back through that line. So I had to learn to avoid the mob that waited for me after school every day. I'd stay late, leave early, go outside exits, I mean. I'd have to hide my bicycle and beat it out of there as fast as I could. I had a cousin who went to a high school nearby that was interracial. So every chance I got, I would go there. One day, afternoon, my bicycle went out of whack, the wheel and the frame. And as I was walking my bike, a woman pointed me to Parkway Community Center at 51st and South Parkway. It's now Martin Luther King Boulevard. And I took it over there, and it was a settlement house. People were very nice, very helpful. They told me about a group that was meeting there every Tuesday night called the Committee on Racial Equality, what later became Congress of Racial Equality. And there I met Jim Farmer and Core. I got involved with them. That was my people. That was my community. And I became part of that. We picketed the ballroom, Trianon ballroom that was nearby, because they wouldn't admit African Americans. We picketed a downtown department store that wouldn't hire African Americans. And then I discovered that there were laws that barred discrimination, but nobody was enforcing them. And I said, well, why don't you do that? And they said, well, we believe in moral appeals. And I thought, well, that's nice, but I want to use the law. And NAACP was also meeting at Parkway Community Centers. They had a different night, I think it was either Wednesday or Thursday nights, and NAACP met there. So I became part of NAACP. And I still remained a member of CORE. I think they did wonderful work. I just wanted to go beyond that. And when I got to the University of Chicago, they didn't have a... well, I went to Roosevelt first, because that was a school that was established in order to break racial quotas, which admitted only very few people from minority backgrounds to most of the universities and colleges of America. Roosevelt was a school that was set up specifically to fight that, named after Franklin Roosevelt. But I was frustrated at Roosevelt also, because it had opened up on a premise of being interracial, and it was great, and I met lots of very good people who are still my friends. But there was a dean there who called the homes of white women who had dated black guys. He said, "Did you know that your daughter was doing this?" Well, I thought that was outrageous. And I joined a big protest against Dean Baldoff. And the following year I transferred to University of Chicago, where I helped set up the first branch, or student branch, and became vice president, first of the University of Chicago NAACP, and then ultimately of the state NAA. We did a lot of very good things. We broke up the housing discrimination in university housing, and then we took on the surrounding community where housing was still Jim Crow. The university had been the holder of the largest amount of real estate in the area that had anti-Negro restrictive covenants. And on May 15th, 1948, the Supreme Court declared such covenants to be unconstitutional, as they would not be upheld in the courts. So that was just great, and we got involved in helping to open up and pressuring the university to open up those facilities. Also in 1948, I became part of a group, Students for Wallace. Henry Wallace was running on a Progressive Party ticket against Harry Truman, who was the president at the time, and we'd been very reluctant to go along with those elements in his own party who wanted a strong civil rights plank in the Democratic Party convention. And Truman was running against Tom Dewey in the Republican slate. But there was in the Democratic Party a wing, the Americans for Democratic Action, founded by Eleanor Roosevelt, that had pushed for a civil rights plank. And Truman was willing to have one, but he wanted a very weak, non-enforceable series of resolutions. But at that convention, a young, sort of nasally voiced mayor of Minneapolis, who was running for the first time to be a senator from the state of Minnesota, Hubert Horatio Humphrey, stood up and fought for a more militant civil rights plank. And when they didn't win in committee, they went out on the floor of the Democratic Convention, and under the rules of those days, he was allowed to introduce a minority plank if he collected enough signatures, and he did. He and others in the ADA. This was the first time that conventions were on television. 1948, the war had been over 3 years, and televisions were coming into style. It was very dramatic because Humphrey introduced his resolution, and the Southerners said that if this resolution were passed, they would walk out of the Democratic Party. Until then, they'd been pretty much a party of Southern racists and Northern big city machines, like the Daily Machine in Chicago. It was then the Kelly Nash Machine. It became the Daily Machine. And Tammany Hall in New York, and the Curly Machine in Boston. Well, Truman had been selected by the Prendergast Machine in Kansas City. So he was going along with the big city bosses and the Southern racists in his party. But when Humphrey took his motion to the floor, it was very dramatic. I was there. I had hitchhiked to Philadelphia. Just a student, but there I was. And there he was. In the wee hours of the dawn, when he stood up and gave his speech, and then he was joined one after the other by various states. New York put its standard out and they supported the ADA motion, and New Jersey put their stake out in the New York motion, actually it was the Minnesota motion. It came through the Minnesota delegation, but it was sponsored by ADA, and Michigan, and Ohio, the big city and the industrial states, one after the other. They began to sing "Battle Hymn of the Republic," and the Southerners were infuriated. And the Minnesota ADA motion passed, and the Southerners walked out of the convention, went to, we'll ignore the phone. The Southerners went over and formed their own convention and their own states' rights party. States' rights has always been a euphemism for racism. And it was because the states had the right to have slaves that we went to war, and they've been trying to get their rights back ever since then. But the Democrats passed the Civil Rights Plank, and a week or two later, which is the reason I hitchhiked to the East Coast, was the Progressive Party convention. I said earlier, I remember, of Students for Wallace, and their big as life was Paul Robeson and Henry Wallace, who had been Franklin Roosevelt's vice president from 1940 to 44, and other very notable progressives. And there was a state senator from Iowa, Howard, I've forgotten his first name. He was a keynoter to the convention, African American, leaned into the television cameras and said, "Mr. President, your party was here just a week or two ago, and they passed the Civil Rights Plank. You can, Mr. President, without any action from Congress, without any, don't need any other political mechanism to do it. You can, with a stroke of a pen, end the segregation in the armed forces." Can I break again?
Yes.